George Russell in 2022 is going to be a Mercedes driver. To think that we'll have yet another generational talent in a potentially championship-capable car just adds another layer to the already highly anticipated 2022 season. Russell, after 3 years, has fought for his chance at a top drive, and now that he's been given it, he will need to deliver on the potential and the hype that has surrounded him during his time at Williams, and he'll need to also be able to do it under a level of pressure like never before. Unquestionably, one of the most exciting aspects of the 2022 Mercedes driver lineup will be the inevitable rivalry that we're going to see between Hamilton and Russell next season. And so I wanted to ask the question, could George Russell in 2022 do what Hamilton did in his rookie season in 2007 and topple an established world champion at the very first time of asking? Now, I will say right off the bat that the Hamilton-Alonso combination arguably isn't the most accurate comparison that I could have made, because in truth, even though Hamilton was classified above Alonso in the championship, let's not forget that they both finished on the same number of points at the end of 2007. If anything, the 2014 Ricciardo and Vettel partnership is almost identical to what we're going to see at Mercedes in 2022. A 4-time world champion who literally had just come off the back of winning 4 straight titles, having the entire team under his control, and up against a young driver in Ricciardo who at the time only had 2.5 seasons of F1 in an HRT and Toro Rosso. Looking back, it still doesn't seem real that Seb in the space of less than a year went from breaking records and winning 9 straight on the way to his 4th title to playing second fiddle to a young charger and then eventually getting pushed out of the team that previously was in the palm of his hand. So yes, that comparison is much more apt, but considering that Russell's teammate will be Lewis, the 07 McLaren comparison is just much more emotionally driven. But let's quickly cover what exactly happened at McLaren in 2007. Ron Dennis, over a year earlier towards the end of 2005, had agreed for Fernando Alonso to join the McLaren team for 2007. Fernando, even though he was still young at the time, would be the team's surefire World Championship caliber driver that you knew could lead a team and that, if given the right car, would always be able to challenge for a world title. For Fernando, the motivation was obvious. Despite winning back-to-back titles with the Renault, he knew McLaren was still a step above in terms of budget and in terms of facilities and the capabilities of being able to dominate in the future. And as someone who idolized Senna growing up, Fernando on multiple occasions throughout his career has talked about how much he loved McLaren and how much he wanted to win a title for them as well. However, then you throw in a young Lewis Hamilton into the equation. Now, Lewis was Ron Dennis's protege. He had been with McLaren since the age of 13. He had dominated the junior ranks and was finally given the chance to make his F1 debut for McLaren in 2007. Now, one thing that must be clarified is that although both drivers were new to McLaren, and although Lewis was just a rookie, unlike the testing restrictions of today, Lewis had done thousands of testing miles and had multiple Grand Prix distances and simulations under his belt. So although he was just a rookie, he was highly experienced within the team and was very prepared for Formula 1. Even so, Fernando was still the defending double world champion and was still the most likely to be the team leader, with Lewis playing a proverbial number 2 role. Of course, things didn't turn out that way, and McLaren yet again topped their previous record with Senna and Prost, and once again created one of the most toxic and controversial team environments in F1 history. Now, there have been countless videos, including some by me, about the 2007 season, but if you want an in-depth look into both the Lewis and Fernando perspectives, then I'll have those videos linked below. To summarize what happened in 2007 though, strangely I'm going to echo what the ever-controversial Flavio Briatore said in his Beyond the Grid F1 podcast, because I actually think that he summarized it pretty well by saying that No one, not even Ron Dennis, despite what he wants to say, expected Lewis to be as good as he actually was and to be challenging for the world title in his rookie season. In reality, if Ron knew what was coming, he'd have never put two of the greatest drivers and two massive personalities in the same team if he wanted to win the world title. Ultimately, that's what it came down to. No one could have predicted what Lewis would have become, but here we are 14 years later, and with a driver like Russell who is immensely talented and very hungry coming into Lewis's team where everyone expects him to still be the number one in terms of fighting for the title next year, could we see a similar story with George matching or even beating Lewis at the very first time of asking? Now, really quickly, I just wanted to say that if you're enjoying this video or have enjoyed some of my other content, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as over 73% of the people currently watching my videos are unsubscribed. I put a lot of work and time into these videos, so it would be greatly appreciated, but now let's get back into it. The first thing to mention is that George is definitely coming into a much better environment. Toto Wolff has been straight and honest with both of the drivers from the very beginning, and more importantly, Lewis and George both have a huge amount of respect for each other and already a huge amount of knowledge about how good the other one is as well. In terms of fitting into the team, Russell already feels like the Mercedes' third driver anyway. Although he hasn't done anywhere near as much mileage as Lewis did before he came to McLaren, relative to modern day standards, Russell has already done a huge amount of running for the team. Apart from his big Mercedes debut in Sakir, he's also done various demo runs, as well as mid-season and end-of-season tyre tests in every single Mercedes car since 2017. Now, yes, although 2022 is a brand new regulation period, that experience of just being with the Mercedes team and knowing the way Mercedes work, it gives him this familiarity that Lewis also already had when he became a full-time McLaren driver in 2007. One of the biggest things that George will have to do is really build the team around him, and this is something that Nico Rosberg and Jenson Button talked about on Sky. George is stepping into Lewis's team, but he needs to be putting in the hours, not just at the track with his crew in the garage, but also back at the factory. That's what really builds the relationship deep within the team, and when you have that relationship with the people back at the factory and all of the engineers, you gain more respect within the team, and you also have a bigger voice when it comes to things like strategy and car development. Having that kind of influence within the team is what puts you as a driver in the best possible position, and if George wants to beat Lewis in 2022, he's not going to do it by just following and listening to what Lewis and Mercedes have to say. He has to find his voice within the team, and he has to get them on his side as well. However, all of this is secondary to the biggest question, which is, just how fast is George Russell really going to be against Lewis? As mentioned earlier, that's what ultimately surprised Alonso, Dennis, McLaren, and even Formula 1 itself when it came to Lewis Hamilton. Qualifying 4th on his Grand Prix debut, and then on the very first corner in his very first race putting an outrageous move around the outside of Fernando Alonso in Australia, told us everything that we needed to know about the kind of driver that Lewis was going to become in just his very first corner of Formula 1. When it comes to George, I've talked at length about why I believe he is such an exceptional talent and someone who, in my opinion, is going to win multiple Formula 1 World Championships. When it comes to qualifying, I am genuinely so excited to see how all of those great qualifying performances in the Williams translate to Mercedes against Lewis in 2022. We all know that George around one lap is amongst the best in Formula 1, but it's going to be so intriguing to see how he compares against Hamilton and Verstappen, who are the absolute best qualifiers on the grid, but now with the added pressure where it's not like qualifying in the top 5 will be a good result for George. When fighting against drivers like Lewis and Max for titles, realistically anything other than qualifying on the front row is going to be a failure. To beat Lewis, George is going to have to show that champion's mentality and that championship level of speed from the very beginning. For him, it's all about the preparation, and that's something that only he can control. Of course, just like with Lewis and Fernando in 07, there's always two sides to every coin, and the other side, of course, is Lewis Hamilton himself. Whether or not Lewis wins the 2021 title, I don't think it will really affect his confidence going into 2022 because, at the very least, he's proven that even if the car isn't quite on the level of the Red Bull, he is still a formidable driver who will push anyone until the end. Although Lewis understands that a talent like Russell deserves a chance in a Mercedes, he's also very aware of just how good George will be, and he's also very aware that potentially, just like in 2007, having two drivers fight for a title might compromise both of their abilities to win the Drivers' Championship. That's why I personally don't believe in the narrative that Hamilton is scared to fight against Russell. He's just realistic in understanding that if Mercedes want to win more drivers and constructors titles in the short term, then the combination of Hamilton and Bottas would be a more cohesive pairing. Unlike Fernando in 2007, however, Lewis is already very established at Mercedes, and he will know with Toto Wolff what the dynamic will be between the two drivers. Again, a large part in the breakdown between Hamilton, Alonso and Dennis was just plain bad management and bad communication. I don't think that that will be a problem with Toto Wolff, and whilst I do think that we're going to see some friction between Lewis and George at some point in the season, which is only natural when you put two drivers of that quality in the same team, I also think that Toto Wolff would have learned how to better control two top drivers who both want to fight for a world title after Lewis and Nico. In the end, just like before the 2007 season started, the more experienced world champion is going to be the predominant favourite heading into the season, and rightly so. But even though the circumstances and the setting are different, just like in 2007, when you put a special talent like Russell who is so hungry to prove himself, and then when you finally give him a car that could potentially fight for a title, you just can't count out a special young driver doing something extraordinary when given the right circumstances. So, could George Russell beat Lewis in his very first season at Mercedes? Yes, that is absolutely a possibility, but will he actually beat Lewis next year? Well, that is a much harder question to answer at the moment, and for that, I'm going to hand it over to you to decide. Well, that wraps up this video. Don't forget to let me know all of your thoughts in the comments box below. And if you did enjoy this video, then don't forget to drop a like and smash that subscribe button as well. And of course, I'll see you in the next one.